This episode of The Clear Out was recorded on the 1st of March 2023 at home in Wicklow, and it is a discussion of time, memory, the elasticity of time, and the focus for that discussion is my memories of my college days, of a lot of time spent in Dublin back in the day and in the very recent weeks through this time period of rehearsal and performance of the play I'm currently doing. And also some memories later in the episode of London, which were partly prompted by my watching, which I will discuss, Joanna Hogg's movie, The Souvenir. So, yes, that is what's coming up. The sun is shining. The sun is shining. And it's beautiful. Okay, I don't think there's anything else to add to that. Memories, college, Dublin, London, The Souvenir. Yeah, and one, if not a couple, of wellness tips at the end. All right, I'll see you around the corner. Cheers.
Ooh, not gonna change my mind, leaving the dream behind. Keep my mojo.
Hi, my name is Dara Clear, and you're listening to The Clear Out. How are you? How's it going for you right now? Take a beat, check in with yourself. I'll wait. That was it. That was the beat. Did you get any answers? Did you get any clarity? I confess I'm feeling rather weary. This show that I'm doing at the moment, which is it's very enjoyable, and I think it's a really good piece of work, but I do feel rather drained by the effort. It's an intense little piece, and it's enjoying a short but very popular run. It's completely sold out, which is nice, and that I think that's speaks to the reputation of the company, Broken Talkers. Well done, lads. Well done, Phelim. Well done, Gary. Well done, Rachel, and everyone else involved. Really nice crew of people, and of course the guys up on stage with me, Fionn and Toby and Ben and myself, and of course Phelim's there as well. So it's happening, and I find myself wrecked the day after the show. No big deal, lads. Everyone relax. I'm just saying. But that's also because I think it's the habit of many actors, the way you manage your energy when you know you're going to have to punch hard for an hour or two or three for some unfortunates who are in like particularly long pieces. And I pity the audience as well. But you're trying to manage your energy so it peaks at performance time. So there's a sort of a surrender to low energy during the day. That's certainly been my habit over the years when I've had acting work. Anyway, grand. So today's episode, somehow it's going to be connected to the elasticity of time. And I should have written down, I had a little insight. Earlier today, and I thought, oh yeah, that's quite a good little kernel out of which to grow this episode of the podcast, and it's gone. I didn't write it down. I should have, and that's a good idea in general, and I think for many people, for many different reasons, it's a good idea to write things down, and creative people, writers, etc., jotting down ideas constantly. That seems to be a good habit, and I'm I'm trying to counsel myself to take up that habit. And it's not because my ideas are so wonderful, but simply because I seem to be forgetting. Forgetting so many of them. I forget them as soon as they've appeared. Yeah, and that's I don't fear that I'm having early onset dementia or anything like that. It's fatigue. It's stress. It's the brain wandering to other areas of concern. But yeah, I will try to, through the course of this episode, I will try to summon that idea. I know what the idea is, but I did have it attached to a specific experience, and I'm just trying to remember what that is. That's the part that's annoying me. Anyway, the elasticity of time is in the mix there, and it's connected to experiencing things for the first time, I think, and the rate of digestion. Anyway, to this I will return. So part of the sort of pinballing of this episode is going to bounce between a couple of cities close to my heart, and they would be Dublin and London, baby. And because I've been travelling up and down to Dublin very frequently over the duration of this show for rehearsals and now for performance purposes, it's the most time I've spent in Dublin on a regular basis in a very long time. And I've been enjoying it enormously. Dublin City is a place I'm very familiar with and spent a lot of time in my mid to late 20s particularly. And it was a very exciting time in this young man's life. Young man as I was then, not as I am now, thanks very much. And it's a very evocative thing to do, to spend time in a city later in life, having spent a lot of time in it younger in life. It's a constant brushing up against memories. It's a constant bumping into ghosts of your younger self, and it is slightly haunting, not in a chilling or sinister way, but in a slightly unsettling way. It's full of kind of emotional echoes, and I find myself sort of walking beside my younger self and having flashes of my younger self striding down or running along Dublin streets, running usually on my way to catch public transport back down to Wicklow. I have one rather uncomfortable memory of wearing too short shorts and some sort of dubious outdoor sandal kind of things, and a t-shirt maybe, and bumping into friends outside a venue, and they were all dolled up to go for a night out, and I was looking like some sort of page boy courier. And I shudder sometimes to remember what I gave myself permission to step out in over the years. And Asher, listen, what can you do? What could I have done? I could have had a look at myself in the mirror once or twice maybe. But in any case, yeah, it has been very nice to be to be just kind of walking the streets of Dublin, often late at night on my way back to my car before I hit the road south for the hour long drive home into the dark roads of rural Wicklow. But cities at night, there's an atmosphere. Barring ill luck, an atmosphere of peacefulness. So staying away from rowdier corners, staying away from the revellers, if you will. And there's just that kind of sleepiness that cities take on, the quietness of the buildings. But Dublin's actually a very attractive city, and I think this is the first time in my life I'm really, truly appreciating that. Just looking at these buildings from, I suppose, largely speaking, a lot of these buildings would be 18th and 19th century, but really well built classical buildings of that time. And whoever's responsible for their upkeep has done a good job, and they're well illuminated at night. And it's just nice. It's just nice walking around College Green, for example, and taking in the Bank of Ireland building, which I didn't know, but that used to be the home of the Irish Parliament, presumably in the kind of colonial days before we had on Dáil, and for some reason the Dáil, which is the government house now, I always think of the back entrance, which is over near Merrion Square, and not the front entrance, which is what? Is that Kildare Street? But yeah, great buildings. And just because of my own particular route back to my car, I walked through Trinity College at night. Now, I was, as a student, as a university student, I was always scathing of Trinity students. I found them utterly unbearable and obnoxious. I've always had a great ability to locate the sort of deserving figures of my hate and vitriol. So it's not real estate agents and hipsters. At one point, it was Trinity College students, many of whom I could, call my friends and relations even. But Trinity College, from an architectural point of view, it's really lovely. It's lovely to walk through, and it's lovely to kind of go, wow, this is in the centre of the city. And then of course, as a storied institution of education, of learning, of knowledge, of curiosity, it's got that energy. It's got that energy, and you're walking amongst young students, eager beavers, just setting out on their journey of what I suppose it is a journey of early maturation. I certainly remember my college days with enormous affection, enormous affection and foolishness, and naivety and learning, and that to me was always the great time. Something I never hesitated to say to young students when I was, the various times I've worked as a teacher. This idea of your childhood and your school days being the happiest days of your life, I was always like, no way. I couldn't have disagreed more. It's that first taste of independence. I mean, I'm sure I've banged on about this before in other episodes, but that sense of of liberation and of independence and of being left to your own devices and being master of your own course, so to speak, and having the freedom to fraternize with whomever you wanted, whomever you so desired, and to bump up against hundreds, thousands of other similarly liberated young people striking poses and finding their way in the young world, and coming across, to my memory, an awful lot of enthusiasm and happiness and excitement and mischief and confidence, and I know generally you can say, yeah, that's what you call being 19, 20, 21. It's what you call being young. But I don't know. I mean, what the Oscar Wilde quote is, "Youth is wasted on the young," but I don't feel it was wasted at all. I feel so many people I remember. There does seem to be a real a sense of, this is great. It's great to be here. It's great to be here doing this. It's great to be here not going to lectures. It's great to be here being a really diligent student. It's great to be here falling in and out of relationships. It's great to be here with this, in the bubble of scholarly fraternity and sorority, I suppose, and dipping toes in the various clubs and societies. And certainly for me, and I got into college quite young. I was only 17, and I certainly would have, if I'd had the confidence or the vision, I probably would have benefited enormously from not going straight into university and having a year or two to, I don't know, to work, to travel. I never had that travel bug. I didn't have the gap year fever, but I certainly would have benefited in terms of the application I would have brought to bear on my studies, because my studies were always relegated. They were down the list, and like, if I was to say right now, what did I take away from university? My very low scoring degree would be quite low down the list. But doing plays, being in the acting society, the drama society, the Rossian Players, as it was called. I don't know if it still has that name, but that was the name of the drama society in Maynooth University, where I went. So that would have been high on my list. Karate ended up being high on my list because I started karate there in university. Swimming, there was this lovely kind of scuzzy, dirty, mossy, slimy old swimming pool in Maynooth, where I improved as a swimmer, and I had lots of good memories of swimming there and showering in their little stall cubicles, which were above the swimming pool, on a sort of a mezzanine level. But it was like an old, I don't know how to describe it really. It was old. It was old, and it wasn't in particularly great shape. But that's where Maynooth swimmers trained and Maynooth water polo players trained. And my good friend Owen was amongst them, and it was he who sort of gave me a few tips and helped me improve as a lane swimmer. So swimming was in the mix. So what's that? Drama, swimming, karate, athletics. I ran a bit of track for the university. We had an embarrassingly small athletics team, and a complete absence of any real facilities, no track. but I did fall in with that crew and attend a few intervarsity meets. So that was in the mix as well. And then it was really girls and friends. And the studies are just so way way below those priorities. And it wasn't that I didn't want to do well or didn't care, but my plate was full. My plate was full with all those other things that I was doing, and there was just so much to divert and so much to amuse and entertain and be distracted by and fascinated by, and girls to obsess over, and relationships to be had, and in my case, virginity to be lost. So that whole adventure was unfolding, and for me, the probably one of the things that set me aside from many of my contemporaries was a complete abstinence from drug taking or alcohol, because those things just weren't on my radar. I had no interest. I hadn't developed any interest in those things at any point up till then, and not for some years afterwards, as it happened. Well, I mean, never. Drugs have never featured. I slowly started taking a drink in my mid-20s, 26, 27, that sort of age, and I've continued on that sort of a little bit every now and again, with occasional blowouts. Let's be fair. Let's not be coy about this. One monstrously drunken night. Around the time I got engaged to my wife. So deliriously happy was I, no drink was refused. Much to my regret, the next day when we were driving across the Wicklow Gap to visit friends, and the car had to be stopped. Stop the car, lads. And I unburdened myself in the bushes. Now that would be via my mouth, thanks very much. But oh my goodness, that was one memorable one. And another very memorable one was a big night out in Melbourne, courtesy of my cousin Cormac's generosity. It was a football celebration. We'd won our league, and Cormac was in a position to take us all for a night out. And I just drank a huge amount of whiskey, and I think I needed a release. But I think that's the most drunk I've ever been. And the most hungover, consequently, as well. True alcohol poisoning. But yes, good times in Maynooth. I don't know where that started. How the hell did I end up in university? Why did I go there, to that place? I've lost my connective tissue. But oh yeah, that's right. Yeah, the whole Trinity thing. Trinity, Maynooth was my place, and a smaller, cozier, less storied, but less pretentious institution, I would argue, then, maybe also now. Maynooth is quite a lot bigger now than it was then, Maynooth University. But I had such a good time there. Oh, I forgot to mention the Outdoor Pursuits Club. Outdoor Pursuits, it sounds like it could be a little bit racy, a little bit indelicate, politically incorrect. But no, the Outdoor Pursuits Club was, of course, about hiking and walking and caving and things like that. And some of my very good friends were involved in that. Shout out to Owen again, and Leo and Ray and others. So that was also there. But yet again, to come back to this idea of the revisiting of places, and what that reminds us of, and the emotional memories, and often I think the shaping memories. Now, I don't know if this is just someone. I'm in my 50th year, and that means I'm 49, heading for 50. So I don't know if this is a very sort of midlifey nostalgia that I'm indulging in. I'm very wary of that. I did an episode on nostalgia ages ago, and I think, I don't have any issue whatsoever with recalling positive, memories, revisiting memories and going, oh yeah, I remember how I was at that time. I don't mind that at all. I'm not challenged by that. I am wary of an indulgent sentimentality, the old rose-tinted glasses, because I just think there's something a little bit too maudlin and too wet, and I think there's always potential when you do that to open the door to regret, and to, I suppose, to sully or relegate your current place. But I appreciate that there's a natural aspect to that as well, and it's probably part of getting a little bit older. It's probably part of being a little bit jaded, perhaps. I mean, these are things I challenge in myself. I don't challenge getting older. I don't have a Peter Pan complex or anything like that. I do obviously try to stay well and healthy, fit. That's part of my own wellness regime, my own wellness coping strategy. And I certainly aspire to maintain that and keep that as part of my regimen as I continue. And I'm saying that knowing that, relax, I'm 49, I'm not 79, so chill the bones. A friend of mine just turned 50 at the weekend. Happy birthday, Alfie, if you're listening. Probably not. Another, one of the many non-listeners. One of the many non-listeners. They do not listen. They do not know how. Perhaps they'll listen now. Perhaps they won't. But that might be my new anthem. Anyway, as my friend Alfie said, 50 is the new 40, and I guess in 10 years' time, 60 will be the new 50, and on we'll go, But on Saturday night last, after our opening night of the show, I had a friend of mine in to see the show, an actor friend of mine, and that was an overdue catch-up, which was really nice. And I also, as it happened, by coincidence, a couple of people I'd worked with 22 years ago, when I was working with Team. I spent a year. I did 2 tours with Team Educational Theatre Company, under the direction of the inimitable Martin Murphy. Great character altogether. And I also, in that time, I met an actor, and I don't know if he was directing at that time, but Mark O'Brien, who, as it happens, is now the co-artistic director of the Abbey Theatre, the National Theatre here in Ireland. And I hadn't seen those guys for, as I say, yeah, I think it was about 22 years since I'd seen Mark. I had bumped into Martin here and there. He was the artistic director at the Pavilion Theatre in Dunleary for a while. So just brilliant to see those guys. And we were just commenting on how long it had been and how short that time had seemed. So yeah, 22 years gone by, with, like a finger click, and yet so much has been packed into that time. And that's we were having the conversation about the elastic nature of time, and it's a bit of a head melter at times when you're sitting there with a couple of people you haven't seen for so long, and yet you feel like if you just looked over your shoulder, you'd still be there, 20 odd years younger, doing what you were doing. It is surreal. And yet, what does the brain do? Like, what does the brain do? It compartmentalizes, I suppose. Like talking about my memories of college a little bit before. I've had experiences with friends, people I was in college with, going, "Oh, do you remember such and such? Do you remember this person, that person?" And I'm like, no, I don't. I just, so many blank spots. But then those people will come back to me with a vivid snap, and I go, "Oh yeah, that person." Like maybe a week or two later, after having them been mentioned previously. And I have this, I don't know if the way I think about my brain and memory and trying to remember things. I try to just relax and go, those memories, they're in there somewhere. They're in there somewhere, and they'll come back at some point. And I won't worry about it. I won't stress about it, because they're hardly worth stressing over, are they? But I do believe they're in there. So it's strange what the brain chooses to prioritize, and I suppose that's largely connected to what we're focused on in our lives at any given time, and that can be a combination of the external and the internal focus. So the external focus, of course, can just be the mundane goings on of our everyday commitments and obligations, whether it's work, family, the financial commitments, whatever it may be, very logistical and practical stuff. And internally, we could be focusing on very different things and very different sort of impulses, very different stimuli, very different anchors, very different yearnings, a myriad of possible internal dynamics going on where our brain drifts to. And I've certainly found, spending this time in Dublin, I was saying it to my wife this morning, the spending time in Dublin, I have so many memories of she and I when we first met, and how we met, and the time we spent together, and getting to know each other, and how much of our kind of the early years of our relationship were connected to time spent in Dublin, gigging or doing plays or socialising or whatever, different places my wife lived, and those are very vivid memories. And some of the some of some of the loveliest memories of our time together, which I remember with enormous affection. And oh my, such changes, such changes after 22 years together. And so be it. So be it. That's life. But that, I mean, that can be confronting as well. To go, okay, where has this journey brought us? And I'm going to stop myself. I'm going to stop myself before I incriminate myself or indict the relationship. That's not really where I want the focus to be today. All relationships as ever, a work in progress. But yeah, Dublin, I just kind of go, Jesus, I have such affection for that city. I love it, and I love being in and amongst it and walking those streets, and hearing those voices. And I love how Dublin has become more diverse. I love seeing different faces and people of colour, which is a phrase I don't love, but I guess that is the kind of the given phrase. People of different ethnicities, but who are clearly of Dublin or of Ireland. I passed someone who looked like they were Chinese the other night, and I could hear him on his phone, and he was just speaking in such a recognisable Dublin accent. I was like, all right, yeah, brilliant. And it's such a contrast. It's such a contrast to the Ireland that I grew up in the 80s. It was so, I suppose, so monocultural in terms of ethnicity. Of course, there was always this kind of tension between the sort of the Anglo-colonial history and the kind of occupied history and the legacy of that with the rest of the Irish population, and that kind of tension always felt quite palpable. But it was, if you're talking about a colour palette, facially, ethnically, it was 99.9% white, I guess. The handful of black people seemed to be known to everyone. Oh yeah, that's Black Dave. All right, okay, cool. That is no longer the case, and there just feels like a vibrant multiculturalism that's present all around Dublin, and I guess around the rest of the country to a lesser extent. But that is, I just think it's fantastic. It just feels like, yeah, this is a country growing up. And that might seem like a strange thing to say when you think, well, no, Ireland's not a young country, but post-colonial Ireland is a young country. I mean, it's barely 100 years since the War of Independence, and Ireland as an officially fully kind of sovereign state, the Republic, it's still less than that. And the repercussions and legacies of colonialism are still very present. So that evolution continues, and that maturation as a sovereign state, an autonomous state, that's still going on. And to look at the political classes, there's much work to be done in asserting that autonomy and sovereign identity, asserting it in the service of the people with really decisive and long-term visionary sort of socialist structures. And when I say that, I'm referring to healthcare and education and housing primarily. Our inability to make those things easily accessible, affordable, stable, I think that is still part of this post-colonial legacy, and a lack of confidence to just make things right. Anyway, that's a digression. So I'm going to steer it back. Now, I did say I was going to talk about London as well, and one of the reasons I want to talk about London is because I just finished watching Joanna Hogg's The Souvenir, which is a movie that Joanna Hogg directed in, I think, 2020, or was it 2019? You can see it on Netflix if you have Netflix, as many of you do, no doubt. And it was a movie that I hadn't seen, that I'd heard many film critics and film podcasts refer to as one of the great films of the year in which it came out. And I came home on Saturday night. Was it Saturday night or Friday night? Maybe Sunday night. Sunday night. Yeah, Sunday. I had a day off. Had a really nice day on Sunday. Took my daughter for a swim in a swimming pool. Dropped in to see my folks. Came home to watch football, and my beloved Spurs beat the hated Chelsea 2-0. Chelsea have long been a bogey team for Spurs. They often beat us. Anyway, the pain it causes me. Anyway, we beat them. It was absolutely brilliant. It was just delightful. And then my daughter and I, my wife, we went out and had a bit of dinner in the local pub, which was lovely. Just a really nice day. And I just felt like sitting down to watch something. I haven't been watching much during the rehearsal period and all the rest. So I thought, let's watch something kind of entertaining. Really what I wanted was comfort food. And I saw The Souvenir and thought, cool, I'll watch this. And it's not comfort food. I'm sorry. And I recognised straight away, this is a very accomplished film. This is a very individual vision, and it's incredibly disciplined in its filmmaking. But I had to turn it off after 45 minutes. It was too rigorous and serious and kind of tense. And it just felt, for the mood I was in, it just felt too much like homework, which is a terrible slight on the movie, and it's not what I intend at all. But it does reflect the mood I was in. So I switched that off, and I rewatched once the John Carney film from 2007, which was a sort of a sleeper hit. This little charming musical, low-key kind of musical set in Dublin, which famously, if you're Irish, won the Best Original Song Oscar at the Oscars the following spring for a song written by Glenn Hansard and Marketa Iglova, who were the two leads in the film, and they had a song called Falling. Lovely song, actually. Once is absolutely charming. And I mean, I remember enjoying it at the time and then not really thinking much about it again, but maybe because I'm on this Dublin nostalgia trip at the moment, I really, really enjoyed it and thought it was just lovely. Glenn Hansard, who's been plying his trade as a singer-songwriter, as a solo artist and in his band The Frames for, years and years now. He's actually a really nice actor. And was a lovely, charming kind of chemistry between him and Marketa Irglova, and just a very, just a lovely little movie that captures Dublin at a particular time, just before the sort of global crash. So kind of just probably post peak Celtic Tiger, and just this lovely sympathetic portrait of people on the fringes, a musician in one case and an immigrant in the other case, and looking at life on the fringes, life with very little to no money. And it was lovely. And special mention to the Da. And this is, maybe it's particularly resonant at the moment because I'm doing this play all about masculinity and boys, and fatherhood is a big theme in the play that we're doing. But the actor who played Glenn Hansard's father in Once was absolutely brilliant, and I mean, I'm looking up his name at the moment because I didn't know the actor and I haven't remembered his name. But he was just effortlessly brilliant and believable as a Dublin dad of a certain generation, Bill Hodnett. And he just has a couple of little scenes throughout the film, and he's just this unflappable kind of widow figure who runs this Hoover repair shop with his son, played by Glenn Hansard. And a Hoover, for the uninitiated, is a vacuum cleaner. I remember having that in Australia. I had friends coming over and I said, "Oh, hold on, I'm just hoovering." And they're like, "You're what?" I said, "Yeah, vacuuming." I was like, "Oh, okay." But in any case, at the end of the movie, there's a scene where Glenn Hansard plays his father on a tape cassette, one of his songs, and they're just listening to it in this little kitchen. And the dad's just there saying nothing. And the song ends, and Glenn Hansard says, "Well, what do you think?" And he's kind of nervous looking. And the dad's like, "That is fucking brilliant." And it's just lovely. And they just have this lovely little scene. And I was in tears because any nice scenes between dads and sons always get me. Historically, they've always gotten me. So, for example, when Joaquin Phoenix kills Richard Harris in Gladiator, that doesn't get me because it's not a nice scene. It's a horrible scene. It's effective and chilling, and it gets me in that way, but I'm not moved to tears. But a scene like there's a great scene in, is it 24/7? I've spoken about this before. Bob Hoskins, as a homeless guy, he becomes a boxing coach, and he becomes a sort of a father figure to one of the young fellas he's coaching. And there's a scene between them that left me in bits. That's 20 years since I've seen that. And then also, I quite like that scene at the end of Call Me By Your Name between Timothée Chalamet and Michael Stuhlbarg. Again, just this lovely fatherly advice. Just a really, I mean, I've heard people kind of go, that's a bit of an idealized version, but look, that's grand. That's grand. We can get a bit sniffy sometimes about these scenes. Go, no, that's a bit too perfect. Well, sometimes parents can do that. They can say the right thing. They can step into that role and access something and recognise this is the moment, or have something on tap that's of enormous significance to the beautiful young people that they've produced. So, anyway, and this scene in Once wasn't wordy or overwritten. It was beautifully played, very nice, very judicious. And yeah, I was in ribbons watching it. Anyway, also more Dublin stuff in Once, and yeah, that ends with Glenn Hansard heading off to London town. So I came back to the Souvenir last night and finished watching it, and yeah, it's really stayed with me since finishing it, and it features a couple of great performances by Honor Swinton Byrne, and she is the daughter of Tilda Swinton, and shock horror, Tilda Swinton's daughter is good at acting. And it also features the actor Tom Burke, who I've only seen two other things. He was in David Fincher's Mank, playing Orson Welles, and that was fine. And he was also in The Wonder, another Netflix film which was put out there at the end of last year with Florence Pugh in kind of post-famine Ireland. I don't know if I spoke about that one before, but Tom Burke is in that with a flawless Irish accent. But then with a name like Burke, and I saw his middle name is Liam, there must be some strong Irish connections there. But he is a very interesting screen presence, with his big dark eyes, and he's got a hare lip, but a great kind of stillness. And yeah, fundamentally, the film is, I believe it's quite autobiographical. I don't know if that's entirely fair, but it's sort of depicting a version of Joanna Hogg's experience as a film student in the early 80s in London, and this dodgy relationship she found herself in. And to speak to the aesthetic of the film, I'll just repeat what I said earlier about the sort of the discipline and the willingness of the director to not give the viewer too much, and the camera often is quite far back. Not always. There's close-ups and intimate scenes, but often these very kind of poised scenes where the camera's quite far back and just observing very neutrally, and not directing us to follow a particular narrative or perspective. And so there's a sort of a chilliness to that at times. And the sort of low-key, muted, naturalistic playing of the cast means at times it's almost got a sort of a documentary feel to it, kind of a realist cinema feel to it, cinema verite or whatever. And yeah, a pacing that's not looking for, it's not really looking for easy drama or sort of, visual or verbal diversion. Really, really interesting and very, very believable. And if you haven't seen it, just check it out. I'm not going to give away any of the plot points. But so yeah. I think worth all the praise it has received, and there is a sequel which continues her story, which seems to also have been reviewed very well. But amongst other things, what the film reminded me of was my memories of London when I was a kid, because my maternal grandmother lived in London. She moved over there after the end of her marriage, I guess in the 60s, because my mother was over there with her as well. And that's where my grandmother remained for the rest of her life. So as children, we used to visit London regularly, which I always thought was fantastic. And London, to me, always had very particular smells, very particular associations, a very particular atmosphere. And in the movie The Souvenir, the central character lives in a very nice apartment in Knightsbridge. My grandmother was in West London, in Ladbroke Grove. It wasn't as swish as Knightsbridge, but it was pretty good. It was pretty good, and she lived on one of these lovely residential streets with lots of trees, wide streets. And And yeah, there was a smell. That's often what I remember first, is a smell. And I don't know if it was a combination of classic kind of urban smells of of bins, of leaves, fallen leaves. I always remember walking on fallen leaves on the footpaths, and the smells of cars, and maybe then more specifically, the smells in my grandmother's apartment, which would have been a combination of maybe her perfume, cigarettes, flowers. But again, and I've spoken about this ages ago, the colour palette of my childhood, the colour palette of the 80s, and whatever was happening in pop-tastic America, that didn't really translate to Ireland. I always feel Ireland, I did my best. I famously had famously within my family, I had a zoot suit, which of course was what the kind of outsized kind of African American style outfit, urban wear, probably kind of brilliantly essayed by Spike Lee in the early scenes of Malcolm X, when Spike Lee and Denzel Washington are striding across the street with these wide-brimmed hats and super colourful suits. I think later they were sort of associated with pimps, if I'm not mistaken. Anyway, I had a multicoloured stripy trouser and pants and jacket number, which I used to wear. That was my zoot suit. That was my bit of colour. But otherwise, I remember the 80s as kind of brown, grey, drab, and London fit that bill as well. And something about the way Joanna Hogg, I can't remember who the director of photography was in that movie, but it tapped into that as well. Kind of a dampened down palette, which fits with my memories of London as well. But I've always had that positive association with going over to visit my grandmother, with various of my brothers and my mother, typically, until I was old enough to go over by myself, and ultimately then lived in London briefly after I left acting school, for about 6 months or so before returning to Ireland. But yeah, London, again, the architecture, the diversity, the iconic monuments, buildings, museums, parks, the Tube, of course, and places like, again, because I was in visiting Ladbroke Grove so much, places like Notting Hill and Portobello Road, all around there. Just, I don't know, it just I always felt very comfortable there. And still, I haven't had the opportunity to visit London since we came back from Australia, but yeah, I still always find it a great place to visit. Yeah. Anyway, the idea then, to return to this idea of the elasticity of time, I think there's something in the mix of this about when we first encounter something and the task at hand of how our being kind of consumes or assimilates the information. And again, I haven't been able to bring it back. I had something specific connected to this theory to kind of pin it on, which I've forgotten. But I think the connection is with new things at a certain point in your life, and how they can dominate the internal landscape. and how they can dominate what your brain has, latches onto and finds fascinating and stimulating. And that can only happen once. Things can only be new once. And I guess as we get older, and I think this becomes habitual. I think this becomes a form of received wisdom. But as we get older, we have an assumption that there's nothing new to see. There's nothing new to learn. There's nothing new to be impressed by. And we sort of surrender to a certain fatigue, a certain cynicism, a certain whatever feeling. And I think that's a trap. I think it's lazy. I think it can be disingenuous, and I think to an extent, I don't want to overstate this, so I'm qualifying it with to an extent, it's self-harming, and it's certainly self-depriving, because I think if we shut ourselves off from the possibility that there is more to inspire us and more to stimulate us the way we were when the world was still young, when the world was still new, when the oyster hadn't been explored fully, we're really missing a trick. We're really missing a trick. And someone sent me a little meme the other day, and it was just a photograph of a robin on a branch, and there was a Maya Angelou quote at the bottom of the picture, and I'm going to paraphrase it because I don't remember it exactly, but simply the sentiment was like, "Oh, what a lovely day. I haven't seen this day before." And I just thought, that's actually fantastic. Now you might cringe and go, "No, it's not fantastic. It's just naff. It's just another, it's another bloody, quick hit of something cute on the internet." But the sentiment is absolutely 100% right. You haven't seen this day before. It's not possible to have seen this day before because you haven't been here before. And I've referred to this before, but to bring something over from the world of martial arts, can you entertain the idea of beginner's mind? Beginner's mind, when there's a combination of humility and curiosity, because that's a great combination. Now, you don't have to be naive. You don't have to be a dupe, or a sucker, as they say. But beginner's mind, that combination of humility and curiosity, a willingness to learn, an openness to being surprised, and an acceptance that you haven't seen it all, that there's more to come, that your cup of knowledge isn't full, and you never want it to be full. You never ever want it to be full. You want to just keep letting that tip out, overflow, and make room for more to come in. And that's in a wellness context, I think that's a very healthy place to be, where you're sitting into the receptive brain, and receiving what's there, rather than trying to control what's there. I think that's an important distinction. And it's a very accepting state of mind. I'm just going to receive this, and to borrow from the sort of meditative Zen-ish vernacular. I'm going to observe, and I don't have to rush in with judgment. I don't have to rush in with the frame. I can just let it be what it is. And this kind of surreality, this phenomenon of perceiving time as elastic. Sometimes it's moving at a rate of knots, and sometimes it's glacial, and sometimes those things are happening at the same time somehow. Again, I think embrace the receptivity, and maybe bear in mind this idea at different times. The digestion process, the digestive process is happening at a different rate. Sometimes I don't know. Sometimes it's candy floss. Sometimes it's a steak, and some things take longer to go through the system. And I like this idea of the assimilation of an experience, of knowledge, of something that we're attracted to, drawn to, stimulated by, that we want to sort of consume. And I don't want to say not embody, but sort of take into ourselves, to better appreciate it. And I think when something really substantial is what we're trying to take in, that takes longer, and I think that's what that can slow time down. And when it's new, that's a larger experience, and then it's no longer new. And when you return to that experience, it's like a montage, and it's like the videotape on fast forward or on fast rewind. And I know some people are going, what's a videotape? Old technology for the younger listener, okay? Anyway, look, I don't feel that was a very particularly satisfactory resolution there, but it's the best I can do with the weary brain I'm utilizing today. So I make no apologies. Okay, so that's it. That was a bit of Dublin, a lot of Dublin, a bit of London, and a bit of Joanna Hogg's very interesting, thought-provoking, quite powerful actually, the Souvenir, which if you haven't seen it, do go and check it out. Honor Swinton Byrne, channeling, physically she's kind of a combination of Rebecca Hall and Winona Ryder, and a very unfussy performance, very natural and quite lovely. And Tom Burke, very impressive as well. Anyway, all right, so look, that's it. I don't know if this was an elastic experience for you, if the podcast went by very fast or abominably slowly, but we are at the end. And if you want to give me a shout out on social media, please do. If you want to rate the podcast wherever you listen to it, please do. A review, throw some comments, share it, subscribe. You can do all of that wherever you're listening to the podcast. You can find it across social media, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, Facebook. If you want to support the podcast, financially that is, you can make a big fat donation using the supporter link, if you're listening through the Acast player. Or if you want to be a regular contributor and throw me the price of a cup of coffee, or I don't know what else is around that price. A couple of bars of chocolate, a couple of Star bars. You can do that using the Patreon link, and that would be a monthly contribution via Patreon. That's patreon.com/theclearout. I would love that. But I, any response, any level of engagement is always welcome. So don't hesitate. Follow a positive impulse. That's another one of my little wellness touchstones. Somebody I follow on social media was asking that question, like, how, I can't remember what it was. How do you know when you're well, or what do you do when you're well and feeling most comfortable with yourself? And my answer was, and continues to be, I follow a positive impulse without fear of judgment or recrimination. So that's how I know I'm in a good space, when you can follow that positive impulse and put something out there and do it in a way that is without fear, without being neurotic, without being paranoid, without being suspicious of the backlash, the sneer, the cynical sneer of disdain. Step into that space, step into the light if you can, and if you can't, you're grand. Sit down, relax, read a book, turn your back on the world for the day, because that's also allowed. Do you know what I mean? It's fine. This whole front-facing, best foot forward, some days you just need to give that a rest. Give it a rest, lads. Okay? It's okay to mind yourself. So, with that sentiment, I will say farewell, and do please mind yourselves. And I'll be back next week with something else. Okay, all the best. Thank you so much for listening. Take care. See ya. Bye.